My fourth recommendation is Eleanor Friedberger. Last Summer is the album title. It is her solo debut. She was in a band with her brother, and they are obtuse art nonsense, just really irritating music that I detest. Absolutely hate it. And I only went back and listened to her career with her brother. The band's name escapes me at this moment, but I hated it, and I only went back because I really liked that solo album, so I checked out her early music and it's just awful. I've never gone back to it. Hate it, hate it, hate it. But her debut, I bought it just randomly because the album cover just jumped out at me. Just this simple photograph of her face up close with this fringe. And on the back cover, I think she's holding a guitar and she's wearing a leather jacket, and it just looks a bit not quite right, doesn't quite gel. I thought that's quite interesting, so I listened to it and instantly, straight away, I just like, oh, I love this. And if I remember right, and I may not be remembering this right, I think when the album finished, I just pressed play again and listened to it a second time straight away. Now, you don't know me, so you don't know if that's unusual behaviour, but trust me, that's something that has very rarely happened. So that's a big deal in my opinion, that I just re-listened to it straight away, if I'm remembering right. It's a bit more skeletal than what you might like from a singer-songwriter. There's something a bit basic and straightforward about it. So, of all the bands I'm recommending to you, this is the one. Eleanor Friedberger's the one I think you might probably be a bit puzzled as to why I like this so much. And it could be definitely argued very convincingly that her second album, Personal Record, is quite a substantial step up. I prefer the first album, Last Summer, but I certainly adore Personal Record. I think it's a very good album. It's certainly well worth investigating. Again, it's one of those cases of the sum is greater than the sum of the parts. It adds up to more than what it maybe seems on the surface. It's a very intriguing album. I get the impression part of the reason why it has so much effect on me is the fact that I don't know anything about New York. So all her names, she makes a lot of references to places and they don't mean anything to me, so I picture more interesting things that are maybe a bit more exciting than the actual reality. She sings about going to the Inn of the Seventh Ray, and the way she sings Ray, and Ray repeats on echo, and it's just so stylish and exciting. And I'm imagining the Inn of the Seventh Ray as being like a depiction of heaven or something. It reminds me of a videotape cover my dad used to have of a movie called The Inn of Seventh Happiness. It's like a bunch of people standing in a paddy field in China. And that's what I get in my head, is this kind of paddy field of people standing in a field. But I believe it's an actual real life restaurant in Central Park or something like that. And I've never Googled it, I don't care, I'm not interested. I don't need to know the details, but I believe it's an actual real restaurant, and the reality is, I'm sure, far less interesting than what I'm picturing in my head. So I think if you are a New Yorker, maybe the album will hit you very differently, but as someone who doesn't know these places, it's all very intriguing and kind of magical. I think also the TV show Girls kind of to some extent plays in my head when I'm listening to that album. It's that sort of depiction of New York as shown in the first season of Girls. So it's a bit more, I don't know, it's very, there's a lot of pictures that come to my mind. It's quite a skeletal album, and yet it creates a world which I think is actually almost a documentary of what New York is like. But to me, because I don't know anything about New York, I've got these images from other movies and stuff in my head, and I'm playing something a bit more exciting in my head than what she maybe perhaps intended. So, Last Summer, awesome album. The next one is the Long Blondes, a British band, very, very connected to Sheffield, which is where Pulp came from as well. There's a lot of references to Sheffield and the areas around it in the lyrics. There's a almost kitchen sink drama quality to some of it. They are very British. I think they may even have references to the Carry On movie series, which, if you are not in the UK, that's a series of like 20 body comedies from the 60s and 70s in Britain, which mean nothing to anyone outside of Britain. The lyrics are really, really good. One of the best lyric writers of all time is, I believe it was a guitarist who wrote the majority of the lyrics. And the singer, Kate Jackson, has a really powerful, effective voice. Powerful and effective in that she delivers the lyrics. She is the right singer for that band. I mean, she's no great singer, I'm sure, but technically she's quite weak. She can't phrase her voice correctly around the words and all the rest of it. I'm sure technically she's pants, but for that band she is the perfect singer, and her voice works beautifully with those lyrics, and those lyrics are very evocative and effective. And I mean, I would put them up there with like Leonard Cohen, who was capable of coining some crazy brilliant phrases. I would put in like the Smiths. They are quite similar to the Smiths sonically and lyrically, except for the Long Blondes are a lot more very female centric. It's a very female. The writer, I believe, is male, but his lyrics for this woman to sing, they are just very female lyrics, and it's just a really good band. This fairly generic, unremarkable indie rock with that singer and those lyrics, and it's very effective. And I really like the backing vocals. I'm assuming there's another woman in the band who does the backing vocals, and she's kind of a crap singer, but the crapness just sounds brilliant. Her crapness is just perfect, and I really like the lyrics. They are capable of coining some interesting, great little phrases. Truly far better than the sum of its parts. Their second album, the lyrics were a lot more generic. They kind of went in a slightly more disco-fied, like, you know, Blondie style disco. And I like the second album a lot. It's a very good album. It's of a lot of merit. But the first album is definitely far superior. And the problem with the second album for me was that they simplified the lyrics. The lyrics lost that very specific, super British, very specific point of reference, and it just became a bit more generic, a bit more universal. So the second album is slightly disappointing while still remaining very, very good. And unfortunately, I believe what happened was that the guitarist who was the main songwriter for the band, he had a stroke, and so the band disbanded because they couldn't really continue, which is of course unfortunate. And that's basically been it. And about 8 years later, Kate Jackson recorded a solo album called British Road Movies, and it was fine. It was good, but it wasn't amazing. It was just good, a good solid British indie album. Choice number 6 is Leona Nay's, her album 13th. It was maybe possibly her 5th album. She had recorded maybe 4 albums that had all pretty much flopped. Kind of straightforward singer-songwriter music with a kind of a pop heart to it. And I don't think, as far as I'm aware, any of it really connected. And So the fifth album, I believe her fifth album, she, I think, to the best of my knowledge, she basically recorded it alone on like an 8-track recorder in her bedroom, and they are basically glorified demos. She basically took these simple demos and maybe took them to a studio and cleaned them up, worked them up a wee bit with a few extra overdubs. So it's quite a she. Her music has always been very subdued, quite laid back. There's no big orchestration. There's no thunder to the music. It's quite a few steps away from hard rock. She doesn't rock, but it's not pop. It's not rock. It's not quite singer songwriter. It's a bit too pop for singer songwriter. Anyway, I stumbled across this album just totally by accident. I was looking at, very briefly, HMV in the UK had a section for second-hand CDs, a small section. I think they did it for a month and then gave up on it. And in that section there was this album, Leona Nay's 13ths, and it was really just the album cover. It looked like a photograph that looked to me like it was taken inside a church, and this woman in the centre at the bottom of the frame, and it just really was a striking image. So I thought, for £2, just for that image alone, I will buy this. So I took it, paid my £2, and was really, really surprised at how good it was. And as far as I recall, I recognised very quickly, oh, this is really good. It's singer-songwriter music with a pop edge to it. Her voice is just so soft. There's nothing harsh in the way she sings. Put it this way, I really wouldn't expect her to ever perform heavy metal in a very convincing way. Very pretty music, and her vocals are very pretty. Her voice has no harshness. She has a very soft voice, and it creates a very relaxing, perfect for ambient music style singing voice that is just very soothing and gentle. Yes, that's a good word. Gentle. Her voice is very pretty and gentle. On her earlier albums, where she was a bit more overtly pop, that softness, I think, worked against her slightly because her music was a bit too soft. I feel in her earlier albums she was attempting to be a bit harder, a harder edged pop sound she was maybe trying to achieve, and her voice was just too soft and gentle, and so her pop music was a bit too sedate and it had no kind of punch to it. So that's one of the reasons perhaps why she was maybe not that successful on the radio, because her songs were just too sedate and gentle and pretty to punch through. And I believe on this album, 13ths, I get the feeling that she had given up slightly more on the pop direction. Maybe her record contract had finished or something, and she no longer had to try to create pop hits for the radio, and she was now creating an album which was more overtly singer-songwriter in style. As it was recorded in her own house or bedroom on 8-track or whatever it was, I get the impression that commercial considerations of making a pop hit single were not foremost on her mind. She has a song with backing vocals that I really like. It's like gang vocals. A whole group of people got into a studio and did the backing vocals clearly as like a gang vocal, almost like AC/DC does their backing vocals, a whole group of people. The song I think is called Leave Our Boyfriends Behind, and it's just really, really good. I just love those backing vocals. Her voice, those backing vocals, really just magic. And then my final seventh choice is New Young Pony Club, their debut album called Fantastic Playroom. This is a British pop band. I believe the album is from 2007, and it is just a really good piece of well-crafted pop. It's indie, so there's maybe a bit more edge to it than you would get on, say, Kylie Minogue. But the lyrics are not particularly good. The melodies are nothing remarkable. The band are pretty average. I can understand why they are an overlooked band who never really achieved too much. And yet, I find it to be a strangely compelling album that, again, is more than the sum of its parts. And it just adds up, and you listen to it again and again and again. And put it this way, I have been listening to this album for, say, 15 years, and I am in no shape or form tired by it at all. It is pop music that is really lasting. There is no particular depth to it. There's nothing particularly interesting about the album. And as I say, the melodies and the songwriting are not particularly amazingly sharp and remarkable. And yet somehow the thing just punches above its weight, and it's more than the sum of its parts. The album just adds up to a cohesive, interesting, enjoyable listening experience, and I just really, really like that album a hell of a lot. The second album was fine, and the third album was fine. They were perfectly good. I listen to them all the time, but it's the first album that has the magic in it, that magic X factor that is inexplicable, in which I cannot explain why it has some extra resonance to it that the other albums don't have. I mean, it could be argued that the second album is technically better than the first album, and yet I would definitely say no, the first album is where the magic is. The second album is a fine, solid piece of pop music, but it's an unremarkable piece of pop music. The real magic is all there on the first album. So, that was 7 albums to maybe investigate. I don't expect anyone to give a shit about anything I have to say on the subject. Oh, I would also like to say I would have included Don Ellis on this. He has 2 albums in particular that I adore, Soaring and Electric Bath. I would have put that on the list, one of those albums on the list, but I've already made a previous video all about him, so there was no need to cover him a second time. So maybe give them a shot. If you have access to a streaming service at no extra cost, these 7 albums I have recommended are probably not going to be a massive waste of your time. I think at the very least you might find 1 or 2 interesting albums, and I do assume that the majority of you will have no idea who these bands are.